And that was looking at early warning systems and seasonal forecasting. But we know that's not enough. As we see the impacts of drought causing real suffering to so many people in the MENA region and beyond the MENA region, we know that we also have to be able to catalyze and stimulate actions on the ground. So the drought maps can tell us where there is a drought and the intensity of the drought, but then what happens next? What we're going to be doing today is to share with you the findings of the Pillar 2, which is the vulnerability and impact assessment of droughts, but also Pillar 3, which is about drought mitigation, preparedness, and responses. So this is very much where we are working on the social and economic, as well as agriculture and water impacts on drought. But then what needs to be done? What needs to be done when the next drought comes? And for that, we know we need multi-ministerial organizations coming together, because drought impacts so many different ways in the countries we have. We're sharing with you the findings of 7 years under the MENAdrought project. And this work started at the International Center for Biosaline Agriculture and is very much now taken forward through the International Water Management Institute, working critically with international partners as well as regional and local partners. And we are delighted that this is very much a seminar when we're bringing together all those different experiences. We will particularly focus on the drought action plans. This is the first time in the 3 countries, Morocco, Lebanon, and Jordan, where we have drought action plans. Most of the countries in MENA region, but also most of the countries more generally, do not have proactive drought plans. And these drought plans are where we then talk about which ministries has which roles, responsibilities, which agencies will do this. So what we're wanting to do today is share experience and insight from the process. So the processes are at the national level in Jordan and Lebanon, and then at the river basin level, because that's what the law, the constitution, or the law sets up in Morocco. And here we're dealing with the Souss-Mesa Basin. So this is looking at a river basin authority response as well as other ones. As part of that, we're going to share with you lots of different insights from that. And to start the sort of framing of this, we want to begin to think through the various partners that are involved. So this work has been done funded by USAID, who have been a critical partner throughout the 7 years, bringing insight and sharing and networking, but also, real technical critique. But also the US National Drought Mitigation Center at Nebraska, and the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland, in America. They have brought important technical expertise, but we've also had national partners in each of the 3 countries. We have had wonderful support, but also insight and a grounding of what we're wanting to do. So in Morocco, Lebanon, and Jordan, our partners, we very much acknowledge the strong input that you have brought to us today. So without further ado, I'm going to ask us to play a video which begins to introduce today. You will see the play of today. We'll have a keynote address by engineer Mona Faki in the moment, and then we'll have some presentations giving you some technical input of what it is. And then more importantly, there's a panel discussion. So please do start putting your questions into the question and answer, and we will put those questions as much as we can to our panelists. We will then have a Mentimeter, and then we will have a closing out at the end. So over to you, Karen, for the video.
Across the Middle East and North Africa, climate change is exacerbating extreme challenges to water and food security. Drought episodes here have become more frequent and severe, spreading over larger areas and jeopardizing the livelihoods of millions. MENAdrought is developing drought action plans with the governments of Jordan, Lebanon, and Morocco as part of its broader efforts to support them to prepare for mitigate, and respond to the worst impacts of drought. The Drought Action Plans build on the project's Enhanced Composite Drought Index, or ECDI, an early warning system that integrates satellite and model data and provides classifications of drought conditions. The plans provide a governance framework and preparedness and mitigation actions to be implemented under normal conditions. During periods of drought, response levels are raised according to the ECDI classification, triggering their related response actions. A monitoring plan then guides a full assessment of impact and policy effectiveness. Through its three-pillar approach, MENAdrought is helping build self-reliance so that countries in the region and beyond can effectively manage the wide-reaching impacts of drought. Visit menadrought.imi.org to learn more.
Thank you, Karen. And that gave you an insight over the work that we have been doing. And one of the areas that we focused in on Monday was on the drought maps. You saw some of the drought maps there from Jordan. We will make all these presentations and these videos available on the MENAdrought website. So do go to them. There's a range of technical briefs and country profiles, and they are in English, in Arabic, and in French. So it means that hopefully that will be easy to understand for all our colleagues across the MENA region. We were going to hopefully have Alona Bachi from the USA to give the next address, but unfortunately she's having problems connecting from Egypt, where she's based at the moment. So hopefully she will join us at the end. So therefore, I'm now going to move on to the keynote address. And we are delighted that Engineer Mona Faki, the Director of Water Resources at the Ministry of Energy and Water in Lebanon, will give us that address. And what we have done is we have recorded those addresses as videos because of some of the challenges we have these days on electricity and internet running. So they are pre-recorded, but Mona is on the webinar and she will happily answer any of the questions or share her experiences with you. So the question, so Karen, the next slide, please, is going to be looking at what do we need for a drought action plan?
My name is Mona Faki. I'm Director of Water Resources at the Lebanese Ministry of Energy and Water and Chair of the Drought Technical Committee. The committee truly did this work together, and I would like to acknowledge the members now. Nisreen Ghattas and Samar Hijazi, also from the Ministry of Energy and Water. Mark Wahaibi from Meteorological Department of the Civil Aviation Authority, Mayam Hanna from the Ministry of Agriculture, Ihab Jum'a from the Lebanese Agricultural Research Institute, Ghalib Faour from the National Council for Scientific Research, and Antoine Zobi from the Beirut and Mount Lebanon Water Establishment. The extreme drought 2014-2015 made it clear to the Lebanese public and political leaders that we need to prepare for drought better, especially with anticipated climate change. We have begun incorporating climate change in legislations and strategies, but we need to mainstream drought risk management thoroughly. Development of the action plan helped us consider how drought risk management can be mainstreamed in strategies and provide a starting point for implementing these policies. We look forward to the final complete installation, validation, and training on the drought early warning system to get embedded into our government's practice. Developing the Drought Action Plan was such a positive process because we brought together a great team of engineers and managers from many ministries and institutions. This open collaboration improved institutional relationships, enriched our understanding for each other's experiences with drought, and helped identify potential solutions for drought risk management. Completing the link between the drought early warning system and the drought action plan will show that despite barriers, we are capable of using sophisticated technical tools in policy frameworks. We will be more confident and capable in overcoming data and information gaps. Already, we have learned much about collaborating on policy development using our collective knowledge, capabilities, and experience. Still, like all countries, we have a long way to go on drought risk management. First, we need to cement progress by completing transfer of the early warning system and building ground reporting networks. We have done most of this work, but the last few steps are critical to ensure the capacity we have built through MENAdrought is sustainable and we can improve it over time. Without this, the Drought Action Plan loses a core pillar of its usefulness and legitimacy. Longer term, we will focus on implementing various aspects of the Drought Action Plan, including those related to governance, infrastructure development, and water-related technical systems, such as the National Water Information System. Of course, collaboration with the international community and transfer of experience is always welcomed and important for such efforts.
Thank you, Engineer Mona. And as Mona highlighted is that the drought action plans, which were developed across multiple ministries, you heard the different ministries that were and government agencies and research groups that were involved, and they met regularly. And I received their WhatsApp messages. There was a lot of energy developing that drought action plan, the first one for Lebanon. But to be able to trigger that action, so when you see the different classes of drought, a moderate drought or a severe drought or an exceptional drought, we need to link that to the drought maps. So the drought maps will show where and the intensity, and then the drought action plan is the one that then highlights already agreed actions. And that linking together, it's called across the 3 pillars, is really critical. And this is something that has been achieved, but it's taken 7 years of long-term engagement to that. So thank you, Mona, for highlighting the importance of having everything joined up and operationalized in the country. So now we're going to turn our attention onto pillar 2. So pillar 1 is the drought warning, early warning systems. Pillar 2 is vulnerability and impact assessments. And these are really critical. We need to know who, where, which parts of the economy, which communities in particular, which agroecological zones are most impacted by drought. And that's different in every single country, different environments, social, economical, political contexts will impact the vulnerability and the effects that those droughts have had. Dr. Makram Balhaj-Fraj, my colleague here at IWMI, is going to give you an insight on some of the work that we have done developing these vulnerability and impact assessments. It's the first time in each of those 3 countries we have brought together data, different disparate sets of data sets. We've had focus groups, we've had key informant interviews. We've brought them together into 3 major reports, which are on the MENAdrought website that you can see for these 3 countries. Over to you, Karen, for the video.
Hello, my name is Makram and I am consultant for the MENAdrought. Welcome to this session on drought impact and vulnerability assessment. This work was done in collaboration with national and international experts and stakeholders from Jordan, Lebanon, and Morocco. Drought vulnerability and impact assessment is the second pillar in the Integrated Drought Management Program 3 Pillars framework. This pillar brings together quantitative and qualitative data on drought history, impacts, and underlying causes of vulnerability across geographic regions and economic sectors, communities, and the environment. It is the link between Pillar 1 on drought monitoring and early warning and Pillar 3 on preparedness, mitigation, and response planning. In the first webinar, I presented key elements of the MENAdrought work on Pillar 2 when discussing the development of drought triggers for policy responses. Today, I will cover several other studies we conducted. Vulnerability can be defined as the predisposition to be adversely affected. It is a complex concept. On the left-hand part of the slide, you see a typical formulation that includes exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. Depending on the time frame of the evaluation, you may see coping capacity there instead of adaptive capacity. In any case, each of those has socioeconomic and environmental elements. For example, exposure relates to climatology, the hazard, and also socioeconomic elements such as the assets or people in the location where the hazard materializes. Likewise, sensitivity is the degree to which the specific system is affected by a climatological hazard of a certain threshold. To assess this complex phenomenon, we used a range of methods to evaluate macroeconomic, agroecological, livelihoods, and institutional and policy issues through studies shown on the right-hand side. Macroeconomic and some agroecological studies used quantitative and geospatial analysis techniques. Other studies used participatory research and quantitative social science methods. There was a high reliance on participatory methods for two reasons. Firstly, they can help establish and facilitate social relations that can increase application of the knowledge in wider technical and political processes. For example, validators network. Secondly, in many cases, we were enabled to apply spatial and statistical approaches due to the lack or inaccessibility of relevant datasets. The rest of the presentation is a quick tour and synthesis of these studies. The project began with an extensive needs assessment. It included well over 100 interviews, focus groups, and workshops to assess the views of government, civil society, researchers, and other stakeholders on drought monitoring and management needs, including key impacts of drought and elements of vulnerability. We checked in on findings through subsequent baseline surveys. These shaped technical development of the drought monitoring system subsequent of work I will describe and policy work we are focusing on today. The drought history and impact assessments showed that the common drought of record was around the turn of the millennium. It was unprecedented in terms of severity, spatial extent, and duration. During that drought, the World Food Programme provided food assistance to Jordan. In 1 year, the Moroccan GDP contracted about 7.5%, and the government spending on some aspects of crisis response totaled about 2.5% of the total government expenditure for 1 year. We estimated that droughts in Morocco have cost nearly $20 billion in relation to livestock and wheat losses during the period of 1980 to 2015. The synthesis of drought vulnerability to reports on the MENAdrought website show more detail, and more publications will be available soon. The drought hazard maps shows areas that, compared to the national average, have higher or lower climatological exposure to drought risk. In other words, it shows the places where drought is more frequent and intense compared to those where it tends to be less frequent and intense. This supports the identification of provinces that are more likely to need support simply based on climatology. Below that, we show socioeconomic aspects of drought exposure. The table shows locations where drought impacts on surface and groundwater are most relevant based on socioeconomic dependence. Then, It shows the locations and/or crop types where drought impacts on staple crops, rangelands, orchards, and vegetables are most relevant. For example, the overlap of high climatological exposure and prominence of citrus crops in southern Lebanon leads to impacts on citrus being a particularly prominent risk in that area. The mixed methods case studies focused heavily on assessing aspects of sensitivity and coping capacity, especially in relation to smallholder cereals and livestock production systems. We focused these efforts in Jordan and Lebanon because in Morocco we took a more region-focused approach in the Souss Mesa. In Jordan and Lebanon, we turned up an array of factors at the household and individual production unit, meso-level, and macro-level that influence the sensitivity of individuals, communities, and economic subsectors. We also traced their interactions. This slide shows a subset of important common factors of sensitivity between Jordan and Lebanon. They relate to a staggering range of socioeconomic categories, including general labor market conditions and those specific to the agricultural workforce, agricultural sector and commodity market dynamics, national policies, their implementation and enforcement, environmental characteristics, educational and cultural factors, infrastructure and its operation, etc. We intend to publish detailed account of these case studies that provide both more synthesis and nuance in the near future. To understand the policy and institutional context in each country and support the development of drought action plans, we reviewed legal documents and traced the development of government-led drought preparedness, mitigation, and response actions. This slide shows a detailed example from Morocco. It describes medium-term policy responses to drought impacts, among other factors, in each decade from the 1980s. It traces the sequential reforms and initiatives that have led to the current statu quo. The list is incomplete and focuses primarily on the agriculture and water sector, as well as closely related economic, trade, social, and disaster risk management policies. This is useful to illustrate the policy cycle over a long time period and the range of policies that relate to drought management. The development of drought risk management takes decades and cuts across many ministerial boundaries, and this type of analysis highlights those facts. In Jordan, and to a lesser extent Lebanon, we could trace similar development. In Jordan, this primarily relates to general infrastructure development, particularly wastewater treatment and treated wastewater distribution infrastructure, peace treaty and water agreement, and agricultural subsidies such as for fodders. Many of these interventions relate to general agricultural sector policy design to increase agricultural production and revenues. This indicates that, to date, governments have generally considered agricultural production and drought management as one issue area. Having developed this body of knowledge on drought exposure, sensitivity, and coping mechanisms in the region, we are now turning to mitigation options that could help with implementation of the drought action plans and otherwise support drought risk management. We are working with ICARDA to develop a comprehensive compendium of practical drought mitigation investment options focused on agriculture and water management. Focus on drought and heat-tolerant germplasm across all countries is required. The development of on-farm water innovation technologies and practices and water efficiency and conservation solutions for water resource monitoring and management are very important for Jordan. Likewise, we have assessed potential financial risk management mechanisms in Jordan. USAID is making major investments in this theme that could be leveraged with other development agencies operating in Jordan. For Morocco, successful on-farm conservation agriculture and functional diversification should be further scaled out. Also, value chain integration for underutilized crop species could be undertaken through an MSD approach. In Lebanon, most of these solutions are needed. However, the most important developments are needed for drought and heat-tolerant germplasm and access to finance for smallholder farmers. In the future, a spatial and community-focused vulnerability mapping could help in directing and fine-tuning investments in agriculture and water mitigation solutions. Our initial market system assessment for potential drought risk management financial mechanisms highlighted several solutions that could be affordable and profitable. We found potential risk transfer solutions via individual and group insurance for livestock herders and staple crop growers respectively. As an example, the risk transfer solution could be developed by collaboration between a development agency, a knowledge partner, the Ministry of Agriculture, and an insurance company. Insurance premium price could be based on hazard mapping, and then drought severity and coverage assessed by the CDI defines affected areas and damages levels based on pasture availability. Digital finance services could be implemented to the financial inclusion of a significant portion of non-bankable farmers, with options for farmers to paying vet services, receiving government subsidies and compensations, or subscribing to other insurance packages such as social services. To conclude, I would like to highlight the contribution of the national stakeholders and consultants involved in the various studies. We are glad to be able to gather a highly valuable knowledge around drought vulnerability in MENA for the benefit of all entities operating in the arena of finalized research for development or for development agencies and companies. Thank you for all your great work. Thank you all for your attention.
And thank you, Makram. That was such a, can you imagine how much data and how much knowledge was put together in 10 minutes there? So the various studies that we have undertaken have looked at the very types of different impacts. We've had general collecting of data, but there's been then some specific studies. One's on fragility and linking that to migration. One is on drought financial remediation. How much is it costing governments to respond to help people through these very difficult times? And then Makram also focused on the work of the various solutions that are there already, that are tried and tested, whether it's germplasm crop breeding, particular types of seeds that we can use in growing our staple crops, but water management, insurance, many different ways that we can begin to help those most impacted to respond to that. So thank you very much for that, Makram. And now our next speaker is, again, continuing this technical sharing of insight from the work, is Dr. Guy Jobbins, who is consulting for us here as a policy specialist, and he's going to talk to us about the processes of establishing those drought action plans I was talking about. There was lots to learn for this policy process. So thank you, Guy, for, again, this is a pre-recorded. Guy is on the webinar, so any questions to him you'd like to ask about the process and how it was affected. So over to you, Karen, for the video.
Hello, my name is Guy Jobbins, and I will talk briefly
probably need to turn up your computer
Jordan, Lebanon, and Morocco to support the development of drought action plans, which I will refer to as DAPs. First, I'll discuss our objectives. Second, I'll outline our strategy when engaging with our partners in government who develop the DAPs. Third, I'll give some detail about how the teams develop the DAPs in each country. And finally, I'll highlight some opportunities for further work. Our overall goal has been to support governments in moving away from reactive, ad hoc drought responses and towards the management of drought risk. Our specific objective has been to provide appropriate risk management tools, including early warning systems and the DAPs that strengthen preparedness for managing drought risk. The purpose of the early warning systems and DAPs is to help governments prepare for and mitigate drought risk in advance, and then detect the onset of drought early, make decisions rapidly, and implement effective responses swiftly. Early detection, rapid responses, and swift action are key to reducing the costs of drought impacts and responses. Being able to do this requires some investment in drought preparedness and risk mitigation. But these costs are lower than the costs of inaction or the costs of responding to impacts slowly and reactively. Of course, our work was not starting with a blank piece of paper. We were mindful of the large and complex landscape of public policy and private interests shaping drought risk in each country. Also, each government, and even each agency within each government, has their own knowledge and experiences of drought, and there have been other initiatives and are other sources of expertise on drought and climate risk management. More broadly, governmental bodies also have established ways of working, including defined mandates, coordination mechanisms, and budgetary processes. We also recognize that governments constantly face multiple competing priorities, and that investing in drought risk management may not be a high priority until after drought strikes. We have therefore taken the approach of working with the grain. This means recognizing that the appropriate point of departure is how things actually are, not an idea of how they should be. It means anchoring our efforts within an understanding of institutional incentives and constraints, and supporting our partners in government as owners of the DAPs to be champions for drought risk management, ready to make progress when new opportunities for reform arise, even if this is after our project has ended. Fundamentally, this meant understanding and respecting the authority, boundaries, and institutional contexts of our partners, working through relationships, and positioning our efforts as building and enabling immediate successes that can contribute to further change in the future, not attempting to solve all things now. These engagement principles meant that our work in each country looked a little different, although the steps followed were similar, and I'll talk about those next. Of course, the first part of the work was to begin collaborating with our partners in government, to understand what they wish to accomplish and discuss how to proceed. Jordan's Ministry of Water and Irrigation already had a drought policy and a drought management unit. They wanted a DAP that would help them coordinate drought action across different governmental departments. They then formally activated a drought technical committee with representatives from different ministries and agencies who would do the work. Lebanon's Ministry of Energy and Water also wanted to coordinate drought action across government departments and wanted the DAP to inform a draft drought policy as well. They were already working with an informal group of representatives from different ministries and agencies on issues of drought, and this became our Drought Technical Committee in Lebanon. By contrast, in Morocco, we were asked to work with the River Basin Agency for Souss Massa, and they wanted a tool to support their decision-making on water allocations during periods of drought. When the working groups were defined, each went through a series of steps, building on the methodology of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'll go through each of these briefly. The initial steps were to identify and subsequently prioritize the specific drought impacts our work would focus on. This was the subject of much debate, but the clear point was to focus on drought impacts that A, affected government priorities, such as harvest failure or water shortages, and B, lay within the mandates of the organizations in the working group. The groups then analyzed each specific impact to assess why it arose during drought conditions. This was the most intensive part of the work, requiring the groups to dig beneath immediate causes to identify the underlying root causes of vulnerability to drought. Once the causal mechanisms were understood, the groups then began identifying intervention actions to reduce impacts. Actions were distinguished as preparation actions, such as developing capacity for monitoring, mitigation actions that reduce exposure or sensitivity to drought conditions in advance by, for example, building infrastructure or changing policy, and response actions that are implemented during drought conditions to provide relief and promote recovery, such as sharing drought alerts or providing financial support. All these actions were then screened and assessed against several criteria, such as whether they support the poorest and most vulnerable people, their likely effectiveness and value for money, and whether there were existing or easily achievable mechanisms for resourcing and implementation. As you can see, the groups were very focused on feasibility. They felt there was no point in recommending actions with little chance of being implemented or for which funding was not available. This becomes most evident when looking at how the working groups sequenced response actions according to the increasing severity of drought conditions and the increasing likelihood of resources being mobilized. During watch conditions, of course, the focus is on implementing mitigation actions and monitoring for the emergence of drought. Alert means that mild to moderate drought conditions have been detected. These may develop into more serious droughts, but at this stage are unlikely to be causing significant hardship. The priority at this time is additional monitoring and raising awareness among stakeholders, so they can begin activating response capacity in case more intense drought conditions emerge. At the level of drought emergency, conditions are likely to be having social, economic, and environmental impacts for particularly vulnerable groups in affected areas. For example, these might be very poor farmers reliant on rain-fed agriculture. Although these specific groups may be severely affected by drought, the overall social, economic, and political impact was unlikely to reach the threshold for central governments to mobilize emergency funds. Therefore, the groups felt, responses must rely on existing resources and be highly targeted to relieve impacts on the poorest and most vulnerable people. Consequently, response actions at this level largely focus on reallocating and reprioritizing existing ministerial budgets and resources. Crisis drought conditions are much more severe. They're likely to result in deep and extensive social, economic, and even political impacts across broad areas of the country. Consequently, national governments are more likely to mobilize national crisis responses and release emergency funds. International and humanitarian actors are also more likely to support responses. Consequently, larger scale and more resource-intensive response actions become possible during such times. These categories of drought severity provide the link to the drought monitor described in the first webinar. As drought monitoring detects the emergence of drought conditions, the DAP then supports the technical committees to rapidly determine the current level of drought risk and recommend appropriate actions. Alongside this effort to identify and sequence actions to mitigate and respond to drought impacts, the working groups also developed recommendations for institutional development and capacity to implement the DAPs. These include governance structures, including roles, responsibilities, and coordination mechanisms, and systems for monitoring drought impacts and evaluating the effectiveness of drought responses. The DAPs are a significant step towards effective drought risk management, but of course they need implementation. In each country, further efforts are needed to strengthen drought governance, invest in drought risk mitigation, bolster drought response capabilities, and develop further tools and resources for monitoring drought risks and impacts. The current DAPs, focusing as they do on priority impacts, can also be broadened out to include additional drought impacts and affected sectors. There is, of course, a role here for international partners, who should take care to coordinate efforts and avoid duplication. Finally, of course, the approach is also suitable for replication in other drought-prone countries who are looking for ways to develop and strengthen integrated cross-sectoral approaches to managing drought risk. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Guy. And there's some great questions coming into the chat now. And yes, it absolutely can be transferred to Pakistan or Afghanistan. And yes, Hamu, knowing what has happened, the drought comes along. The Drought Action Plan is there to help those people, those that are impacted, get on their feet quicker to make sure they don't lose just one season of crops, that they're able to restock agriculture, restock and things like that. But more importantly, we know that droughts are going to increase in frequency and in severity in the MENA region. We're seeing this, unfortunately, as a result of climate change. So what we want to do is to be able to make sure drought mitigation, in other words, those areas that are impacted this time are less impacted next time, because we've taken a whole series of mitigating measures. So now we're going to have a panel discussion, and we welcome you adding questions into the chat there. Is there anything you'd like to have? This is going to be moderated by Dr. Yusuf Brusi, who is the head of IWMI's Middle East North Africa Regional Office. So over to you, Yusuf.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Bonjour tout le monde. Very happy to be here. I'm very happy to see, as Rachel said, some good questions there. So please ask questions, suggest even new things, and let us learn about your experience in your respective regions. Thank you for the speakers. It was really important to join the dots. In the first webinar, we learned about the early warning system that IWMI and its partners have developed to help these countries to be prepared to drought. And now today we are learning about two other pillars of this project, which are the vulnerability assessment and the development of DAPs, Drought Action Plans. The very interesting thing in this effort is that these processes were inclusive. They were based on cutting-edge scientific methodologies, and also collaborative, because IWMI technicians and scientists were working with local stakeholders, a big group of stakeholders. And now in this panel, we will have more details, and we will learn from the other side, from the side of our local stakeholders about their experience in vulnerability assessments, as well as in the development of DAPs. So I'm very delighted to host in this panel 3K persons from 3K organizations in this project. So we have Engineer Mona Faqih, which is the Director of Water Resources in the Ministry of Water and Energy in Lebanon. I have also Engineer Ali Ghanim. He is the Director of Drought Monitoring Unit in the Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation in Jordan. And Engineer Faris Yahya, who is the head of Statistics Directorate in the Department of Statistics and Strategy in the Ministry of Agriculture in Morocco. So let me start with you, Engineer Mona, if you may allow me. We learned a lot about this project in Monday's session and today's session. It's a very integrated and a project with a lot of science, a lot of interaction between many stakeholders, with many specialties and perspectives. So we can imagine that there have been challenges that you need to overcome. So could you please take us through some challenges that you faced during the development of, for example, the DAPs in Lebanon? And mainly, what are the lessons that you can share with other organizations or countries who are in the process of developing a drought actions plan? Over to you, Engineer Mona.
Thank you, Mr. Yusuf. Thanks for IWMI, thanks for all the experts for the excellent presentation, presenting our huge work, which has been starting since months. And really, I'm so happy of the quality of the work done with Mr. Guy. Actually, he organized our idea. He helped us because sometimes you have an ideas in your mind, but you cannot organize it. So he helped all the group for organizing these ideas. And I would like to thank my colleagues who were from the Drought Technical Committee. Really, I'm so proud of them, of their experience, their attitude towards and the commitment towards this very important document. Really, I would thank them all, especially that, I worked with this group. It helped me that I worked with this group in previous projects, because there is always collaboration in different projects, different themes, different, and the issue that my group can put the hat of the technical expert, and he can put also the hat of the manager, which is rarely you can find in one person. So really, we were very lucky with this group. Actually, the challenges, and I preferred for me making this action plan in person, because the online has been started since the COVID, and it is good that you save time, you save money for trips, but actually the interactions is very important between different stakeholders, different group. So I found this is the biggest challenges. Besides that, the situation in Lebanon, economical situation, most of our colleagues, we were not going to work, and they were committed to sometimes to go to work and watch from their meetings. For example, I'm lucky that at my home, all the facilities of internet, electricity, because this was a big challenge. Sometimes you must choose where the time of the electricity it comes, so that we make the meeting. Also, the challenges while we were thinking the committee all together, we wanted to choose something realistic, something doesn't cost, which is very challenging, really, because we wanted this document not to be put in the shelf. We wanted to be implemented, realistic, make an effect, make an improvement, an added value for our objective to face the drought. Thank you.
Thank you, Engineer Mona, for your insights. Yeah, definitely. We all passed through this very tough period, the COVID pandemic, and we have to manage and to adapt. And today we are talking about adaptation. Adaptation is the key word. Adaptation to uncertainties and also adaptation to drought. And I note also the specific challenges to Lebanon, which are related to logistics, etc. And all our hearts are with you, and we hope that things will be improved very, very, very soon. Thank you very much. The same question will be posed to Engineer Ali, probably to hear more from the Jordan perspective and Jordan, let's say, specific case. What were the main challenges, and mainly what are the lessons that you can share with any other organization or country who are working out their drought action plan?
Yes, thank you. I would like to talk about some challenges. It's about already we prepare the action plan now. We have it as a draft. It's sectorial one. We include everyone with us. I see a lot of questions in the box ask about the action plan and the strategy. Here in Jordan, we have a policy for the drought, and we work on the action plan. But the working for the action plan, it's not easy to work on it because the cost of the action or the mitigation. This is the main challenges. Sometimes we have a lot of solution. For example, in water sector, we can use the desalination water from the sea, but the cost will be very high sometimes. The agricultural sector, we can use the treated wastewater, but sometimes we need pipe to transfer the water. We use it already in Jordan. The environment, for the health, the cost, it's one of the main challenges to work on the action plan. Another challenge is sometimes it's the clear rule for every institute to work on it, but we try to be clear in the action plan with action and which institute can done or work on this action. We try to check every strategy for and policy for every ministry to work on it as a priority for that ministry. But as we said before, sometimes the financial can make some problem to work on this action. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Engineer Ali. Definitely, the economic aspects is very important in all what we do and what the governments need to do to tackle any kind of risks and disasters. And we learned through the presentation of my colleague Guy that, for example, having these DAPs will help in putting in place efficient and cost-efficient practices and solutions to help the communities and governments to get prepared to drought. Thank you very much. Now my question to Engineer Faris Yahya. We are all agreeing that adaptation is very important in our region. And with the COP27 around the corner, and by the way, it will happen in the region, in MENA region. So for you as decision makers, government official, with this experience through the MENAdrought project, and having 3 pillars implemented: the early warning system, vulnerability assessments, and the DAPs developed for Suez Massa region. So through this experience, what would be your, let's say, suggestion and advice for other organizations and governments in the region to go through this adaptation and resilience solutions, specifically against climate change related or related drought? Yeah. Over to you, Engineer Faris.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور يوسف. شكرا لجميع الساهرين على تنظيم هذه الورشة ذات القيمة العالية فيما يخص عناصر جواب للسؤال اللي هو صعب وسؤال مهم وسؤال محوري عند جميع الدول. دونك تحديد السياسات التي ستقوم بها كل دولة دونك تعتمد بالأساس على وضعية كل دولة وعلى التأثير الملموس الذي نراه بكل دولة. دونك نحن هنا في المغرب تأثير الجفاف دونك أصبح مرئي بطريقة كبيرة جدا، ومرحلة التفكير في التغيرات المناخية أصبحت من الماضي. دونك نحن اليوم في مرحلة التعايش مع هذه التغيرات المناخية. دونك كما تعلمون في المغرب هناك استراتيجية أود أن أضع عناصر جوابي خاصة من جهة القطاع الفلاحي. كما تعلمون هناك استراتيجية جديدة في القطاع الفلاحي تمتد ما بين 2020 و 2030، وهذه الاستراتيجية من بين محاورها 8 هناك محور خاص بالتغيرات التخفيف من التغيرات المناخية على القطاع الفلاحي. في هذا الصدد يمكن تقسيم السياسات العمومية التي جاءت بها الاستراتيجية الجديدة إلى نوعين. هناك سياسات خاصة بالمناطق البورية والمناطق الرعوية، حيث التأثيرات المناخية هي بحدة، وهناك سياسات التي تستهدف المناطق التي فيها زراعات تستعمل السقي وتستعمل أنظمة الري. في المناطق البورية وخاصة المناطق الصحراوية والمناطق الرعوية هناك إضافة إلى أنظمة التتبع والإنذار المبكر للجفاف، والتي اشتغلنا جزء كبير منها مع إيمي. سيكون إن شاء الله هناك برامج لتطوير هذه الأنظمة لتمكننا إضافة إلى الإنذار إلى وضع سياسات وإلى وضع الإنتاجية وإلى وضع الإنتاجية المرتقبة والتعامل بسرعة مع هذه التأثيرات. في المناطق الصحراوية والتي تستعمل المياه، السياسات العمومية تتجه إلى وضع أنظمة سقي تتيح الاستعمال الأمثل للمياه، وكذا وضع تكييف الزراعات التي يتم غرسها في هذه المناطق، تحديدها بحدة بحيث يكون هناك الاستغلال الأمثل للموارد المائية في هذه المناطق. ومن التحديات التي بدأت مع الجائحة وهي مبدأ الأمن الغذائي. في هذه المناطق سيتم التركيز بالأكثر على إنتاج المزروعات التي تدخل بالأساس في أولويات إنتاج الأمن الغذائي للمغاربة. على المستوى التنظيمي قامت وزارة الفلاحة مؤخرا، أو لا، هي في طور وضع إنشاء مرصد وطني للجفاف الذي سيمكن من الجمع ما بين المتدخلين اللي هم كثر في هذا المنظار، وسيمكن من دفع أنظمة التتبع والاستشعار الجفاف في المغرب. وشكرا جزيلا على حسن الإصغاء.
شكرا Engineer Faris. Thank you very much for your insights and experience sharing, and it was interesting to know how these efforts of MENAdrought projects, specifically the DAPs, can be integrated perfectly with the government plans, the government strategy in regard to agriculture and also in regard to water resources and disaster risk management. And in Morocco, as you know, we focused on a region which is Souss Massa for the DAPS development and also for the vulnerability assessment because of the institutional settings in Morocco, and it was on national scale for Lebanon and Jordan. So it was amazing to see how this work can be adapted to the local and national circumstances. Thank you very much. My next question will go to Engineer Muna. So since we discussed in the previous session the developments and also the process that was followed to develop the DAPS, the Drought Action Plan in all countries. My question to you now, how do you see the implementation in Lebanon? So how do you see the concrete implementation of this plan of drought action plan in your department and in Lebanon?
Sorry, the question again. I didn't because the voice was not good.
Yeah. My question is about the implementation of the drought actions plan. So how do you see the implementation in your department in Lebanon going forward?
And actually, Lebanon now faces a tremendous crisis, and the water and wastewater services are declining due to the devaluation of the Lebanese lira and the cost of the fuel. So we have a lot of efforts now to recover, at least. So what about the drought? We will facing a big challenge. Actually, most of the actions in the drought action plan are, you know, when you make your strategies and policies based on the integrated water resources management and the scenarios, when you make different scenarios, and you are planning for facing climate change, the growth of population, the displacement, the people displacement. So we already, most of the actions are already in our action plan related to strategies. So the main concerns now that the financing, you are excellent in planning, you are excellent in making strategy, but the finance is very important, unless yes, especially in the vulnerable countries, which are the developing countries, which are don't have at least a way to live, to stay in good health. So, and I don't see any challenges regarding the institutional or just the issue of money. This is the only challenge in Lebanon. Thank you.
Thank you, Engineer Mona, for your insights. And yes, the finance aspect is very important in this value chain. In this project, we as we've seen in the presentation of my colleague Makram, there are some solutions that have been scrutinized and investigated. Some of them, they are technical, and also some financial solution as well. And we all know that in the market, we need to have technical institutional capacities to be eligible for funding. And I think through this project we showcased a good example of how science development and cooperation between many organizations can make this happen. This good institutional and science-based setting for potential finance and funding opportunities. Thank you very much. My next question will go to Engineer Ali. So for you, Engineer Ali, the same question. In Jordan, there have been a national wide effort for the developments of DAPS, the Drought Action Plan, and also for the vulnerability assessments. For you, how do you see the implementation in Jordan? And before to give you the floor, I would really invite all the audience to ask questions and to take benefit from this opportunity, since we have the stakeholders here present, also we have the scientists and also use ID present with us. So please give us your insights and also questions. So yeah, over to you, Engineer Ali. How do you see the implementation of the developed DAP for Jordan?
Okay, yes, thank you. Now, as you know, and everyone know, Jordan, it's already, we have a stress in water. We have shortage in water. It's not only because the drought. A lot of action already we work on it in Jordan, not because the climate change only, not because the drought only. The drought can increase our problem, like this year or last year. A lots of action already. It's not only by Ministry of Water. From all ministry can be part to response of the drought. But we need some time to have to measure this action. Sometimes the action it can be percentage. Sometimes it can be only talk. So the smart action it's good for us to measure and to check our quality to work on this action. Here in Jordan, there is a lot of effort to work on this action. What we already written on our action plan, and on another action in reality, in agricultural water and in water, in health, and environment. So there is a lot of effort, but still we need, as I said before, and already Engineer Mona talked about it, sometimes the financial situation can make it's not easy to work on this action in reality. But at least with this evidence, now we have the monitoring system. So it's easy to get funds sometime, and because you have evidence on the science way. We have a drought on this area, for example, like last year in Tafile. We sent our report for the Ministry of Agriculture because that area it's affected by drought, and it's approved by the satellite and by the ECDI, which is already work on it. So Ministry of Agriculture can use this report for donor or for people to work on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, generally for these good ideas and good examples of the operationalization of this work on day-to-day life, especially in the water scarcity circumstances that is hitting Jordan, and water scarcity is also in many parts of the MENA region, including Morocco. And now my question will be to Engineer Faris. How do you see the potential use or the actual use of the outcomes of the 3 pillars of MENAdrought to help the insurance sector in Morocco? I know that in Morocco we have a good insurance sector helping growers to be more resilient and to tackle the drought impact. So how do you see the potential or the current use of these outcomes of MENAdrought projects to help the insurance sector in Morocco?
شكرا دكتور يوسف على هذا السؤال الجيد. دونك موضوع التأمين، دونك كما تعلمون لتشجيع الفلاحين المغاربة على زرع المناطق الفلاحية بالحبوب في بداية كل موسم فلاحي، يتوفر المغرب على نظام تأمين خاص بالحبوب والقطاني، حيث أنه في كل سنة يتم تأمين حوالي 1,000,000 هكتار من المساحة المزروعة بالحبوب. هذا لتشجيع ولدفع الفلاحين على بدر في بداية كل سنة، ويتم دعم هذا النظام التأمين، يتم تسييره بالتعاون بين القطاع العام والخاص. وجزء من التعويضات التي تذهب إلى الفلاحين الذين يتأثرون بالجفاف يتم دفعها من خزينة الدولة. وفي هذا المجال بالضبط يتم استعمال المعلومات الخاصة ومؤشرات الخاصة بالجفاف، حيث تمكننا هذه المعلومات من رؤية التأثيرات المحتملة على المزروعات من جهة، وإعطاء التقييمات الأولية للمبالغ المالية التي يجب رصدها في كل سنة، يتم رصدها في كل سنة. دونك هذه خصوصا وأن نظام التأمين في المغرب نظام يلزم الفلاحين المؤمنين بالتحديد الجغرافي لكل المساحات التي سيتم غرسها وهذه المعلومات الجغرافية للمناطق المؤمنة تساعدنا يكون لها قيمة مضافة حين نقوم برؤيتها مع التأثيرات الخاصة بالجفاف. ويمكننا في هذا المحور الإضافة بأن التوقعات أو نظام توقعات الأمطار الموسمية الذي اشتغلنا مع إيمي في هذا المشروع سيمكننا أيضا من تحسين هذا النظام ووضع تقييماتنا بالدقة المطلوبة. شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا Sifer. Thank you very much for this good example where in the reality on the ground these outcomes of the projects are helping you administering also other stakeholders in Morocco, like the insurance company, to make the farmers resilient to drought, but in efficient and cost-effective way. Thank you very much. Probably the last question I will ask my colleague Guy to briefly tell us how, according to you, Guy, how do you see the role or the involvement of humanitarian aid agencies and NGOs in the DAPS? So according to experience, what can you say in this regard? In 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Yusuf. It's a really interesting question. So to directly answer your question, the DAPS are there to coordinate government risk management. So the question then becomes, at which point do the humanitarian agencies become involved in the relief and recovery efforts from drought? And it was interesting, we did an exercise with the Jordanian Drought Technical Committee on that very subject. How would the international community be informed, and how could international relief efforts be mobilized to support the work of the government of Jordan? And that's where the value of the work we had done on the DAPS and the value of preparedness in general became very apparent, because we began to realize that there are time lags. It takes time to mobilize those international responses. They have certain data needs. They need to be able to justify it to their donors. And so if that is only happening late in the season, long after the drought is beginning to have impacts, people have lost their harvests, people have lost income, this is when the help finally does arrive, it's coming often late. And so this is the value of having the early warning systems, linking them to the DAPS and being able to identify the emergence of problems, because it enables the government to send alerts to the international community and the humanitarian system and say, we think we may need some support in the coming months. Please tell us what you need from us so that you can mobilize your responses on your side and we can discuss how to collaborate together. So I think that's a great question, because it emphasizes the value of doing this work on preparedness. Yeah, that's the short answer. But to answer a question that you didn't ask, if you'll allow me 30 seconds, is just to say that from my perspective, one of the, in fact, the most important thing in this work has been the commitment, the engagement from the governmental partners, and having people like Mona, like Ali. I didn't have the pleasure of working with Mr. Ferris, having them as champions of the process and leading it forward has been absolutely key and critical. They're the people with the expertise. They know how the governments work. They know how to make things change inside those organizations. And you know, working with them and relying on them to be the people who understand how to move the process forward has been absolutely critical. So thank you, everybody, from all the country teams. It's been a real pleasure working with you.
Thank you, Guy. Absolutely, this work is about science development and also collaboration between many stakeholders. Definitely, big thank you for everyone, for stakeholders, also the founder and all other partners. And thank you, Guy, for answering the question quickly. It is very interesting question, and I thank the participant from the audience who had asked this question. Thank you for your interaction. And speaking about the audience interaction, now we will go to another chapter of this webinar, which is again about the interaction and hearing the audience. I will leave the floor to Mo to take us through the Mentimeter.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Yusuf, for this engaging panel discussion. I'm so glad to see that the participants are engaging and posing critical questions. We are going to take this one step further, and we are going to invite you to respond to today's proceedings by answering 2 questions or responding to 2 questions. The first question is, in what ways are the processes to develop drought action plans and the actual format and content of them transferable to other countries? And the second question is, what are the major barriers to developing triggers, comparable policy mechanisms to structure governmental decision-making about drought responses? So what are the major barriers to developing triggers or comparable policy mechanisms to structure governmental decision-making about drought responses? We are going to use Mentimeter for this, and Sine has posted in chat the link to access Mentimeter. If you have a mobile phone or tablet, you can use that to access, and you type in there the web address and the code 98900035, or you can use the QR code that's now on the screen. If you want to use your computer, just click on the link to access Mentimeter and another browser will open, and you can then respond to both questions at your own time, and we will then look at the results. If you struggle to access this, you can also put your answers in the chat, and we have posted both questions. You can write in English, Arabic, or French. So let's take a minute to look at the answers, and then I'm going to hand over to Rachel and Dr. Yusuf, who will be looking at the results. So let's see. Wait for the results coming in. There is the first question. So over to you, Dr. Rachel and Dr. Yusuf.
Thank you, Mo. And we're already seeing some. So we can see things like workshops, training, transferability is limited. Well, it depends which part is going to be working, but you absolutely in that response are highlighting the key areas. Every country we work in, the political institutions are different. So although we can take the 3 pillars, we can take a lot of the learning, being able to put them into that local political context is really difficult. Climate conditions, society, exchanging experts via countries, online webinars. We know that this is important. There are collaboration between national and regional level. And one of the reasons for these webinars is to exchange the information and to showcase the work of Jordan and Morocco, the government agencies in those countries. So it means that you can go and speak to Engineer Mona or Engineer Ali or Engineer Faraz, just learn and be able to share that. We're trying to put as much of the information as we can from our learnings. We are obviously, there's sensitivities to governments and what we're able to share. these are many of these are government documents, particularly the Drought Action Plans, and it will be for them to decide how much we can do. So we're talking about spatial databases here, expert mission study tours. I am sure that the countries, I'm sure Engineer Ali or Engineer would be delighted if you wanted to come and talk to the group, the Drought Technical Committee in Jordan, and what might be there, what we'll be using. Bridging the analysis by some types of organizations already existing can help in the transmission of information regarding the DAP. Absolutely. So one of the things that we did in those early years, we collected every report that we could find, whether it's from the Ministry of Health or the Ministry of Environment or Ministry of Agriculture, and synthesize the data. Often there isn't a drought report, but the statistics are hidden in overall reports. So we need to find a drought year and then take the information, whether it's the water flow, the reservoir levels, the livestock levels, the dips in livestock. So it's very much trying to, with the drought framing, being able to then be able to look at what you might be able to see in that. Yusuf, do you see anything? We are running very short of time, so Yusuf, if you could do the next one. We need to put up the next question, please, Mo. And Karen. So this is about what are the major barriers to developing triggers or policy mechanisms to structure government decision-making. We know that when you have a government, when there is a drought, there is an expected response from the government. You know, people will often say, please, can you help us? It might be different sectors, different parts of the economy. So what are the sort of triggers or comparable policy mechanisms to help that decision making, to then trigger those actions? We heard yesterday.
We've seen. Yeah,
please.
Sorry, Rachel. And by the way, we've seen some examples in the presentation of our colleague Makram, who has shed the light in some of these triggers in his presentation. So these triggers are very important because they are specific to each country, each context, and also the institutional settings in these countries. So specific work on a case per case is very important in this kind of exercises.
I think we might have a technical issue with the last question, so we would welcome that coming into the chat. So thank you, Yusuf, for coming into this. I'm now going to hand over, we've got the last part of this webinar, and in many ways, I'm going to respond to something that one of the questions that was asked earlier. It said, what are the lessons learned? And to me, lessons learned are be patient, ensure everyone is involved and that there is ownership as part of the process. Be flexible as political leaders change quite often. And so where you've got that political engagement, you have to start again. Leverage events to catalyze action. Unfortunately, we don't want a drought, but when a drought comes, it's amazing how you can get that response. And to understand that everything we have done in the MENAdrought project has had the foundation of about empowering self-reliance for governments to be able to handle those questions. Now, to me, one of the other critical components to the success of this project has been the long-term engagement of USAID. They have funded us for 7 years. We could not do this in 2 years or 3 years. And it really has been. We've had the most wonderful 3 agreement officers to work with on that. And Alona Bachi, who is the USAID Middle East Climate Lead, it's over to you to finish off today's for today's webinar. And it's such an honor to have you with us, Alona.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, everyone. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, and see you, Alona.
Okay, thank you all. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here, and I do want to thank, I'll do it really brief, but I do want to thank in closing, to thank you, Rachel, thank all our partners here as we wrap this up. And I just want to use these few minutes to reflect back on where this program really started. As we said, it started way back in 2015. during discussions of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN in a workshop that we talked about building collaborative platform to address critical water issues that confront agriculture and food security in the Middle East and North Africa. And my predecessor that you just mentioned and the driving force for this important initiative at USAID, Dr. John Wilson, called in for the development of a drought management system for the region. And to quote maybe part of a testimony to the US Congress that USAID made at that point, we presented the fact that the challenges are great, but the cost of inaction is unacceptable. Today, 7 years later, it's with great pleasure that we gathered here, and I think you guys all heard about the great accomplishments and the great successes of the program, but also about some of the challenges that the team really had to overcome. I will say that the team included, under the leadership of Rachel and the EMI team, it included the University of Nebraska partners, Johns Hopkins, NASA, and many more. But most importantly, really the team on the ground in the countries where we work, in Jordan, Lebanon, Morocco in this case, and hopefully in the future and many more, where we really worked with experts in the region, with many of you here on the call, as well as with government partners in countries, as well as between countries. This whole process, you heard about MENAdrought having three different pillars, basically. The first one was to help establish a regional drought monitoring and early warning system. The second one was providing the assessment of the vulnerabilities and impacts. And the third one, finally, as you heard about in a lot of detail today, was supporting the development of policy actions and measurements to mitigate and respond to drought impacts. This very important aspect of the implementation involves many obstacles that the team had to go through. We usually call this third part of navigating the science and policy interface and the translational part. A lot of times we call it the valley of death. And the reason we call it that is because it is so difficult to overcome, both technically, but also because if we don't cross that valley, it can be really dire for many people, communities, businesses, and countries. The approach you heard about here of collaboration and really using these three pillars has been proven to be very successful in many other countries, including the US, Mexico, Australia. And finally, now we see it starting to be implemented in the Middle East, thanks to this project. I will say here, I'll jump briefly and just say that this specific outcome that we saw here, we see that as a start. Although we're wrapping up the MENAdrought project, we still see a lot of need in the Middle East and North Africa, as many of you guys have outlined today in detail, so I will not repeat that. And we really look forward to continue supporting similar projects in our other countries and continuing to strengthen the existing knowledge that we managed to help foster. As you saw, the Biden administration has actually appointed on Monday, you heard of Miss Ann Vaughn spoke. She was appointed by the Biden administration to co-lead efforts and adaptation. USA takes these efforts very, very seriously. And as we come into COP27, we're hoping that we'll be able to really help and expand these efforts along the country. I do want to also mention that, as Rachel and the team here also outlined very nicely, drought knows no borders, and therefore we feel that these kind of drought management programs have to know no borders as well. And they really rely on very strong cooperation, both internal, national, as well as international. And we definitely see it as part of a regional process in order to promote regional prosperity and peace. I do want to thank you at closing, Rachel. Thank you and the whole team. I also want to thank, as I said, my predecessor, Dr. John Wilson, and also engineer Sonia Massis for helping manage this program on the USAID side for many years. And I look forward to many more years of continued collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Alona. It's been a pleasure and an honor to work for USAID and to bring this support that the US government has given to the region. And John and Sonia and you have been such a pleasure to work with. I like it when you challenge us and you always make us better, as well as support us and bring us out there. So we have really, really enjoyed that. So it really is time to wrap up now. Thank you for staying here with everybody. I would like to thank USAID. I'd like to thank our international partners. I'd like to thank our national partners. I'd like to thank Kurumu. I'd like to thank the MENAdrought team. You cannot believe how hard this team have worked over 7 years, and the weekends, the holidays, everything you have done because you so believed in everything. And I so also want to thank you, the audience, for joining us today. We really are committed to being able to transfer our experiences, transfer everything. So do get in touch with us, and thank you so much for joining us today. Over and out. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.